there, it's Linda in Belize. Today I'm going to cover a Belize investment analysis. I had a viewer ask a while back for some details on San Pedro versus Placencia, and since I offer tours in both places, this is very relevant. In addition to comparing those two markets, I'm going to explain how you can evaluate any short-term rental, because if you're a real estate investor and have done mostly long-term rentals, this is completely different. So if you're looking for an investment property, you need to look at the investment income potential. And one way you can do that is by looking at AirDNA. AirDNA contains all the data from Vrbo and Airbnb to show what different properties in different markets look like. And it basically gives each market a report card of sorts, which we're going to go through for both San Pedro and Placencia. Now, I always talk about San Pedro being the most popular tourist spot in Belize, which is indeed the case, and that's because it's an island near the second largest barrier reef in the world. However, as I've been in Placencia, I see there's tons of tourists here as well. So, which place do you think makes the highest income? Well, let's take a look. Because I'm an accountant, I love doing rental budgets. And to analyze investment property, the first thing you need to look at is the revenue. And for short-term rentals, you should be looking at what's called the ADR, which is the average daily rate, as well as the occupancy. And occupancy should be done on a month-to-month basis, ideally, especially if the property is seasonal, which is the case in Belize. And I always use AirDNA as a starting point for this type of analysis. So going into AirDNA initially, I just want to show that they give you a market of Santa Monica just to show an example. So Santa Monica, it says it's a market grade of B, and they look at things including rental demand, revenue growth, seasonality, and regulation to see if the market is a good one for investment. Average daily rate you can see, as well as the occupancy, and it kind of shows the different range so you can see with seasonality what it looks like. So average daily rate of $275, but in August it's $296 in that market. January is $250, and so we're going to see the same kind of data when we go look at Belize. Now, because they're using averages, I just want to give the note that I pulled a lot of this research in the beginning of April, and so if you go look at this later on, obviously the numbers are going to be different, but it'll still tell you the market grade and what the rates were at that particular point in time to use for comparison purposes. So if I want to analyze San Pedro versus Placencia, I really need to analyze AirDNA quite a bit first. So the first stats that I'm going to show are only for San Pedro town. And AirDNA only has certain categories depending on how many listings a specific market has. So if I look up Belize District San Pedro, I can see it has a market grade of an A, 90 out of 100, with an average daily rate of 178. The problem with these numbers is the fact that the rest of Ambergris Caye is excluded. These numbers are only for San Pedro town. Now, if you were investing, say, in the south of Ambergris Caye or in the north, you might want to analyze what the market grade and the ADR are for those markets, but you can't do that. So what you instead need to do is take the entire Belize district with no neighborhood. And here, what you find is that you still have a market grade of A, 92 out of 100, with an average daily rate of 200. Now, in this particular graph, what's being included is the entire Ambergris Caye, also Belize City, and Caye Caulker. Okay, so when you look at that overall, it's an average daily rate of 200. Again, these aren't numbers you can use in an overall rental budget because they have so many different markets in them, but we will talk about kind of how many listings are in each of these areas where we can, so that you kind of get an idea how these numbers are derived. Now, when we're looking at Placencia, we kind of have to do the same analysis. If I pull Stand Creek District, which is where Placencia is, it gives me a market grade of an A+, 97 out of 100, and the average daily rate there is $186. Now, the problem, if you analyze this in detail, again, is that Placencia is only talking about Placencia Village. The Placencia Peninsula is 16 miles long, and fortunately, we do have a lot of other neighborhoods we can look up in Stand Creek that are separately identifiable. We have Maya Beach, which is where I live right now. We have Plantation, and we have lots of data that we can analyze, which I'll talk about later on. Now, what if I want to look at the whole of Stand Creek so that I get the whole Placencia Peninsula together? which is kind of what I wanted to do for Ambergris Caye, which I said we already know we can't. Same thing for Placencia. And if we want to look at all of Placencia, the peninsula, we're going to be including Hopkins as well, because that is part of Stand Creek. Now, overall in Stand Creek, our market grade is an A plus, and it's 100 out of 100. So our ADR there is $211. So that is one of the things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, is that Stand Creek actually has a higher market grade and a higher ADR than what the Belize district has. Now, all of these markets obviously look very promising because they're all A and A plus when we noticed that Santa Monica was in the Bs. So every market you're analyzing, you can actually do the same thing for. But unfortunately, if you wanted to add, say, Edmonton, which is my other investment market, you do have to pay for that data. Now let's look at occupancy rates in detail, specifically first for the Belize district and San Pedro. So because we can only break down San Pedro town and Belize City, let's look first at the overall Belize district. So you can see here the occupancy rate is 68% and the average length of stay is 4 days. Now you can see in the graph at the bottom that the occupancy rate is very seasonal. Now, how many listings are overall in the Belize district? Well, it shows that there's 1,416 active listings. Let's see how many of those are specifically in San Pedro town. So when I look at San Pedro town, you can see here that there's 322 active listings, and the occupancy rate's actually a bit lower at 65%. So what is bringing up the rate to 68? Well, is it Belize City? Nope. Their occupancy rate is 57%, and there's only 99 listings in Belize City, and the length of stay there is 2 days. So we know right away from this analysis that many of the really high occupancy properties are located somewhere else, either north or south in Ambergris Caye or in Keycocker, which we're going to look at some specific top performing properties later on, which will give you some clues on what to look for when you're buying an investment property. Now let's look at the occupancy rates of Stand Creek and Placencia. So overall in Stand Creek, it shows an occupancy rate of 58%. Now, because there's so many different properties all along the peninsula, also in Hopkins and even some in Dangriga and many private islands, you have to look individually. You can't just look at these overall averages. Again, the seasonality on the overall graph kind of looks similar to what we saw in San Pedro. Now, if I look individually at Placencia Village, I can see the occupancy there is 59%. So kind of comparable to what the overall occupancy average is. Now, there's 161 active listings in the village out of the 792 in total. Now, what other neighborhoods could we examine on the peninsula? Well, the first one I'm going to talk about is where I actually live, which is in Maya Beach. So Maya Beach has 60 active listings, and the occupancy rate there is 66%. And our length of stay actually is a bit higher at 4 days compared to the village at 3 days. Now, I'm not going to show these occupancy rate graphs for every neighborhood, but just to give you an idea, if Maya Beach is higher, what else is higher? Well, Plantation, which is another area on the peninsula, it also has an occupancy rate of 66%. Well, what brings the occupancy down then to the 58%? Well, one of the neighborhoods that does is Hopkins, which is at 57%, and it has 157 listings, so almost as many as the village. Now, does that mean that Hopkins wouldn't be as good of an investment? Well, that's not the case necessarily. We have to look at individual properties and how they perform. And as I mentioned, we're going to do that later in the presentation, where we can look at the top performing properties in both Stand Creek and in the Belize district. Now let's drill more into average daily rates, or ADRs. First, looking at the Belize district, which of course includes Ambergris Caye, Keycocker, and Belize City. So an entire place is an average daily rate on average of $341. And basically, if you were looking into more detail on a different part of the screen, you would know that Belize district, 76% of their rentals are entire places. So that's why this is higher than the ADR that we looked at earlier on. And the luxury properties are a good thing to note too. So the average for those in the Belize district is $574. Now let's compare this to what there is in Stand Creek, which includes the Placencia Peninsula and Hopkins. So for an entire place, which are 82% of rentals in that area, it's $436 for the ADR, and luxury properties are at $796. And once we go drill into top properties later on, we'll kind of see why these rates are the way they are. So what I decided to do as an analysis is examine a comparable property for each market. And I chose ones at Sleep 14 just because those were some of the top revenue producing properties. Now, both of them are beachfront. So the one on the top is, you can see it says it's a luxurious beachfront villa with a pool, fountain, dock, and cook. And it has an average daily rate of $1,567. The one on the bottom is a luxury beachfront four-bedroom villa near Placencia. And I can let you know that this one's actually in a place called Serenian Bay, which is just really close to Maya Beach. And it's actually, Serenian Bay is the place where we actually play pickleball. So when you look at the occupancy, you can see the San Pedro home has 97% occupancy, which is fantastic, which leads you to a revenue of $532,000. And then the Placencia one has a revenue of $445,000 with a 76% occupancy. Now, a couple of notes though. First of all, even though San Pedro has higher revenue, Placencia was available for 29 less days. You see the days available at 319 versus 352. So that could be maybe the owner was staying in the property, maybe it became available partway through the year. We have no idea what's causing that. The other thing is looking at the ADRs. So the Placencia property ADR is 1840 versus the San Pedro one at 1567. And there's always a balancing act between pricing and occupancy. And people usually play with that to see what pricing gives them the best occupancy to get the higher revenue number. Now, what you can also do for these two properties is individually drill into each property to see all the upcoming bookings. How are they doing? Do they have bookings in the summer, in September? What is it like this December? You can check all of that in AirDNA by going into each individually property, which is pretty cool. Now let's look at some one-bedroom top properties in the Belize district. So the top 6 are showing what the revenue looks like. So Mara Laguna has a property that's earned $137,000. And then there's 2 at Grand Caribe, 122 and 87,000. Now, we don't really know what makes up the revenue. Is it the occupancy or is it the days available? Because we can see the ADR here of 379 and 314, but all you would need to do is drill in farther to look at all the details if you were considering buying a unit, say at Grand Caribe. Now, to take that example a little bit farther, let's say you go, oh, Grand Caribe looks awesome, a one-bedroom condo, it's 123,000 in revenue. Well, you have to first figure out what is the HOA fees, what is the rental management split, how much do they charge you for cleaning every time a guest comes, what's the repairs and maintenance. All of those things factor into what your return will be. Now, if you're buying a unit in a building that already exists, I always recommend getting the owner's statement if they will give it to you. So, and I would definitely ask for this as a subject to, if you're making an offer on a property, is to get the past year's statement showing what the owner received. Because if you were buying, say you want to buy a condo for $500,000, if you found that you were only going to get $10,000 net a year, and you take 10,000 divided by 500,000, you probably would not be doing that as an investment property. Now, if it's a place you want to come live, those numbers would not be relevant, of course. Now let's go through the same analysis for Stand Creek, looking at one-bedroom units. I also included studios here. So you can see, for example, property 2, that's not the private island, that's the top spot, is at revenue of $55,000. So the ADR is 193, and you could drill into these individual properties that do really well for revenue and see what the days available are and what the occupancy is. And if you are working to buy a property for investment, make sure that your realtor knows what your purpose is. So if it is purely investment, you want to look strictly at what the return on investment is from one property to the next and compared to other investment options. If you're looking for something that you love to come stay in and just rent it out occasionally, then obviously pick the property you like. As a buyer's agent, I can show you many different properties that might meet your needs, no matter what you're looking for. So this type of analysis can be done for any type of property you're considering, but revenue and occupancy are just a part of the analysis that you need to prepare a rental budget. So whenever you're buying an investment property, if you don't do a rental budget, you're up for potential surprises. I know people that have bought properties in Belize and have been very disappointed at the returns that they get, whereas other people are very happy, and usually it's because they analyze their deal correctly. So, what other factors do you need to look at? Well, obviously, just because you have high revenue, well, if the purchase price is high, it still might not make sense. What are cleaners like, and what's the cost and the quality? What's the revenue split on property management? Now, one thing I always like to tell people, if there's a revenue split that's really low, check everything else they're charging. I've seen people that charge 20% and then nickel and dime for everything. Other properties charge 50% but include everything. What are the HOA fees like? How much are repairs going to be for your property? So those are all things you have to factor in to do a rental budget. Now, I do have a detailed template and I do offer consulting if you're looking for help with doing a rental budget. So basically, what you need to do is for any investment, you need to ensure that cash flow is positive and then compare your return to other investments. So, what is ROI? Well, basically, you take the net income, which is your revenue less all of your expenses, and divide by cash paid for the investment. So in summary, I want to talk about both of the areas. Sand Creek at an A plus for market grade and Belize District as an A mean both markets have properties that will work very well for investment, but you really have to analyze any purchase carefully and do a detailed rental budget. There are a lot of properties that have high revenue that may not do as well because of huge HOA fees or very high expenses. Also, make sure you factor in any personal component to your analysis before you buy a property. So, a couple other notes I like to tell people. First of all, if you buy a property in Belize, it needs a hotel license to be on Airbnb. And some things can transfer over if a property had it, but not everything. And if you build a property, you definitely need to go through this. And I've been in that process for a year and a half and still don't have mine. And I know other people that are in the same boat. Another thing I like to warn people about is the fact that realtors are not licensed and that there's no MLS. A lot of realtors show only their own listings so that they can get the full amount of commission and not have to share it with another agent. So when you're buying property, depending on where it is, it makes a difference on how easy it's going to be to rent. If you buy in the Best Western, which is a place I sell a lot of property, it's already got a hotel license, so you don't have to do that. Same if you buy in the Hilton Hotel within Mahogany Bay. But if you're buying a house or building one, you definitely need to go through this process. Also, some condos don't even have the ability to get a hotel license. And sometimes I've met people that have bought condos where they thought they could do short-term rentals where it is banned in the bylaws of the condo. So this is why I recommend working with a buyer's agent and is in fact why I became one so that I could only represent buyers. I also do offer consulting if you're looking for help on doing an investment budget or analyzing a market. There's the consulting link on the slide there. And I also do offer tours for people considering a move or investment in Belize. And the next one is coming up this July. We're going to be going to San Pedro, Placencia, and Hopkins during Lobster Fest. And if you're also wanting opinions of other people who've settled in Belize, check out my interviews with expats that I now have on my channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon in Belize.